Now, what I'm curious about is how did this background that you had and where you were growing up in Red Lake and skinning fish and eating off the land and sewing your own clothes, how did that lead you to become the fashion designer that you are today?
Greg,
Yes.
can I just come back in 1 minute? Because do you remember I told you about my little sewing machine that I learned to sew on?
Yes.
I still have it. Would you like to see it?
Yeah, I'd love to see it, please.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Thank you.
I'm back. Here it is.
Welcome. Oh, wow.
First of all, it comes in a little box like this.
Amazing.
So it's a very old machine, but it's never missed a stitch.
And this is the machine you learned to sew on.
Yes. And back then, these were the types of patterns,
Uh-huh.
that you would buy in little envelopes like this, and then the pattern pieces were
We're inside.
all printed out for you. And my mother had those in her fabric store. And there's a little, people that might have one of these at home tucked away, maybe their grandmother had one or their mom. This was a big deal. This was state of the art because this was an electric machine, and this was the foot pedal that you pushed your foot on. And there's the machine.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Isn't it gorgeous?
It is beautiful.
What a beauty. And so the thread goes there, and this is what I learned to sew on. How cute is that?
That's amazing.
The Singer Manufacturing Company, Singer Sewing Machines.
Incredible.
And it still works.
Wow.
So I learned to sew on this machine at the age of 3.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so when I look back on that time and how it informed and prepared me for my career as not just a designer, because what you have to understand is that most fashion designers are very creative, but not always that interested in the manufacturing process or the technical, more the technical side of the industry,
Right.
the apparel industry. I was different in that way because the creative part was something that was a muscle that I had to build.
Right.
I did not have that natural I had a resourcefulness, and I had a talent for building things out of fabric. But when I went to Sheridan College to study fashion design, I realized that most of the other people there, were very strong in the creative part, but weaker in the parts that I was strong in. So that was the difference. So I took my love of sewing and my expertise at making garments and cutting them and all that sort of stuff, and built that into making and manufacturing my design. So my design ability kind of grew parallel to my building my company.
Right.
And I always imagined, I sort of had a vision in my they call it the third eye, but when you close your eyes?
Yes.
Do you ever close your eyes and you see, it's almost like a movie playing there?
Absolutely.
Does that happen to you?
Oh, yeah. It happened to me.
Anybody out there? Does that ever happen to you?
I'm putting my hand up for some of the people out there.
Okay, so when I would see that movie in my mind's eye, I imagined myself building a factory, building a place that had not machines like this little Singer, but faster machines and bigger machines. And it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle where you have the outside edges.
Yes.
The middle is not filled in yet.
Yes.
And the box, it's kind of a metaphor for life. The box that the jigsaw puzzle pieces come in doesn't have a picture on the outside.
Uh-huh.
Right? So what do? You start by getting the corners, and then you build the outside, and then you fill in the middle. Well, that's what it was like when I was about 17, and I wasn't doing well in school. And I was really good at sewing, hunting, fishing, picking blueberries, all the sort of stuff. I was really good at anything to do with my hands. Mm-hmm. I started thinking, well, what kind of a life am I going to have? I'm going to make clothes for a living. That's what I had. And when I had the vision of making clothes with the help of a lot of other people. Mm-hmm. Now, my mother had her own business, which was the fabric store in our basement. My dad progressed from being an underground worker with not even grade 1 education to being given the opportunity to bid on a contract in one of the mines in the area to sink a shaft. He had a very good reputation as a miner. He was, educated by actually doing the work. Mm-hmm. And he bid on this contract, and he was successful in getting the contract, and many, many more after that.
Right.
So when I was in my teens, my mom and dad, I was actually 15 when my mom and dad, I say they ran away from home, but in fact, when I was 15, they left me alone in our house in this village because my mother needed to travel with my dad to northern Manitoba to other mine sites where he had crews of men doing contract work. Mm-hmm. So I also had a lot of responsibility at a very early age. And this idea that I could build my own company was something that I saw my mom and dad do.
Right.
And so the idea of getting a job and going and working for a big company was just not even on my radar. Mm-hmm. It was the farthest thing from my mind. Oh, by the way, that's Marley, my dog. She's going to bark every once in a while.
Cute.
If somebody comes. Don't mind her. Would you like to see her?
Sure, please.
Okay. This is Marley.
Hi, Marley.
Isn't she cute?
She's gorgeous.
She's so sweet. Yeah, so that's Marley, if you hear the woofie. Okay, where was I?
Your parents going to Manitoba and you being left at home by yourself.
Yes, so I was left at home by myself. And also, we had when we were fishing up the lake and going hunting and so on, I always drove the boat. Now, we had an 18-foot, 185 horsepower Volvo inboard outboard motor boat. And it was a powerful boat. And to get us to the fishing spots as fast as possible. Uh-huh. And I always drove the boat. Uh-huh. So from the time I was 6 years old, I was driving the boat. Mm-hmm. And so I had a real comfort with machinery. Mm-hmm. And I watched my dad clean the spark plugs and change the gasket because we didn't have yellow pages. We didn't have people to do that, right? Uh-huh. It's not like we could pull up to a marina and say, service our boat. No, we had to do it ourselves.
Right.
So I watched him take machines apart and put them back together again, and I understood why the spark plugs were so important to an engine. And in my mom's fabric store, when she would sell fabric to a person and they'd say, oh, I don't know if my machine's not working or I don't have a proper machine, my mom would say, oh, well, do you want to rent this one? So my mom had machines that she rented out to people who didn't have machines. And my job was when they came back, usually when they weren't working anymore, because they had been threaded wrong or something, my job was to take them and clean them and oil them and sometimes take apart some of the mechanism and get them in working order again. Wow. So comfort with machinery is also something that I learned up there.
Right.
This communication, so many people these days sit right like 20 feet away from a person and they send them an email.
I know what that's about.
How crazy is that?
I know.
What is that? So I understand email and I use email. I'm on Twitter and I'm on all the social media and everything, but there's just nothing like going and talking to a person.
Of course.
And so I think that was in my DNA. That was part of my growing up. Also, this idea that if you needed something, you made it.
Uh-huh.
And if something broke, you fixed it.
Right.
And it was okay to do it in a way that other people weren't doing it. So, I think that all of those things prepared me to have my own company. So when I went to Sheridan College, I learned pattern making, which was great because I didn't want to use these patterns anymore. I wanted to make my own.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't learn that much sewing, but I did learn some tricks, some sewing techniques that I didn't have before. And I was put into an environment where I was surrounded by other people, many of them like me. They didn't do that well in school. They were really good at clothing, sewing, different aspects of fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I found my tribe.
Amazing.
Yeah. So up until I went to Sheridan College at the age of, 19, my association was school was a place that I didn't like, and I had experienced failure. I graduated from high school with a 53% average.
Wow.
Okay, so that means that I failed quite a few, and I did okay in English, and I did okay in the, non-scientific, non-mathematical subjects, but I ended up with a 53% average. Thank God that wasn't a consideration in me being accepted at Sheridan College. So I met other people that had some of the same experiences where a lot of my successes and my affirmations came outside of school.
Right.
And a lot of my failures came at school.
Right. Wow. It's an interesting, I mean, your background is very interesting in itself because when you spoke at the Top 10 event, you didn't share all of this information. I discovered this later on when we had some chats with each other, which are really fascinating to me, purely because of the vision I have for this business and the mission I'm on to really help all children, no matter whether they are academic or whether they're creative, to really just find their own purpose and their own vision and their own mission in their own lives. So it's kind of hearing your story. Every time I hear it, I'm like, I'm so grateful I'm speaking to you, because it really, for me, it really feels like there was this. I think you mentioned it. You've mentioned this to me. I'm not sure how you phrased it. A divine. I can't remember that. And a divine appointment.
So when I was at the Top 10 event, I only had 10 minutes.
That's correct.
And I went over by about 2.5 minutes. So
right.
I was trying to cram as much as I could in. But you being there was what I call a divine appointment. Because within 30 seconds of you telling me what you were doing, I just went, there's a need for this.
Mm-hmm.
Why should somebody like me go through the educational process and feel like a failure?
Right.
I thought there was something wrong with me.
Which is what a lot of kids feel as well.
Right. People that do well, people that love school and aren't much into fishing and hunting and sewing and, blueberry picking. Those are the people that become teachers.
Absolutely.
So wouldn't it be interesting if some of the people like me were encouraged to become teachers so that they could understand the students that are like me?
Absolutely.
And I can't be the only one.
Of course
I can't
not.
be the only person that where do you think plumbers come from? Where do you think electricians and construction builders and people that can build things and people that can fix engines? They don't learn that in chemistry class in high school.
Of course not.
So I really want to support you to create awareness that even though education has come a long way since I was in school,
mm-hmm.
I still do not believe that it addresses enough people whose learning style, which is to learn by doing, to learn by making mistakes.
Right.
Sometimes you make the same mistake 3 times.
Right.
And to learn by experiencing it physically.
Absolutely.
And I believe our education system needs to have a place for that.
I totally agree with you. It just reminds me a little bit about some of my background with learning. Now, even though I was academically inclined, so I was able to learn a lot of what I was taught in school.
So you did well in school?
To a degree. And part of the reasons why is because as much as I was able to gather information by listening, one of my other learning styles was using my body. So I was very kinesthetic, very movement orientated.
Yes. Did they think that you had ADHD?
No, I didn't have those tendencies. So I could sit still and I could focus and all of those things. But the way that my brain absorbed information, which I didn't realize until a few years ago actually, was I needed to be able to be doing something, so I needed to have some movement in combination with me listening.
Yes.
Otherwise it was very difficult for me.
Twiddling something in your fingers, right?
Yeah, and there had to be something while I was listening.
Right.
So I could gather that information and really absorb it. And thankfully now I'm aware of that, so when I do things, and I listen to people, for example, like when I was at the Top 10 event, most people would know, who know me, I'll be fidgeting, I'll be moving around just a little bit while I'm listening, because it's the only way that my brain can really capture that information. If I sit still for too long,
your brain stops.
Just the connections can't be made. So my dream really for this business was to help a lot of kids out there who I know are getting labeled with all sorts of different disorders or disabilities.
Yes.
But what I know is that they're not really disabled in a lot of cases, and they don't really have disorders in a lot of cases. They just have very different interests and very different ways of learning.
Exactly. Like, for example, I'm standing right now.
Right.
Okay? In my company, I never had a desk with a chair.
Wow.
I stand all the time. I stand when I'm designing. I stand when I'm on the phone. In fact, usually I'm moving around, and with your permission, no, I don't need your permission. I'm in my house. I'm going to move around. And I really think that if some kids could just have standing workstations, they'd probably be, it'd probably keep their mind engaged to a greater extent.
Absolutely.
There's a school that's been in the news recently where they spend the whole day outside and they go in for recess.
Wow, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, and why not? I mean, because that's sort of what my life was like in Red Lake. I mean, up in the town called Koshiner, actually,
right,
which was the village that we lived in outside Red Lake. We spent time outside all the time, and then, and that's where I did most of my learning. So when we met, it was a divine appointment, because I hold these views and I express them whenever I can, but I haven't done what you're doing, which is to actually make an impact in a organized way, rather than just complaining, in an organized way for educators. And it may not be easy, but I really commend you for doing it. And I really believe that this could prevent some of the people like myself from feeling like failures. Was I ever going to become a teacher? No, because I had other problems. I realized at the age of 50 that I had a reading disability, and I discovered it again by a divine appointment, quite by accident. People call them coincidences. Yeah. But by a divine appointment, I crossed paths with a person who heard me on the radio talk about my support of literacy programs. And the interviewer asked me, well, what is your connection with literacy? And I said, well, I'm not illiterate. I can read, but reading is not a pleasant experience for me. Oh, really? Tell me more about that. And in this interview, unbeknownst to me, there was a woman listening to it who was a tester for the Thunder Bay Board of Education for Irlen Syndrome. It's not dyslexia. It's a cousin to dyslexia. And she heard me on the radio, and she actually crashed the conference that I was speaking at in Thunder Bay a couple of days later and said, I think you have Irlen Syndrome, and I brought my kit, and I'd like to test you.
Wow.
And I was pardon the pun, I was a textbook Irlen Syndrome person. So I believe by that time I was 50 and I had a very successful company. And, my company started in a 2-bedroom apartment, and I had that picture in my mind of that bigger place. And each time I grew, I moved to a new location. Some of the puzzle pieces filled in, but I knew that I wasn't in that place yet.
Right.
So 5 locations, it took me 5 moves to get to the place that I visioned. Man. And it was a 60,000 square foot state-of-the-art manufacturing facility that was completely outfitted according to my design and the way I wanted everything laid out. Mm-hmm. It had 150 employees. We manufactured products that I designed and shipped all over North America to about between 300 and 400 retail boutiques. So we sold to the stores, and then the stores sold to the consumers.
Right.
And we also had 3 corporately owned stores in the Toronto area, and 10 commissioned sales agents all over North America that were showing the collection to buyers. Mm-hmm. And it was there that I had achieved that when I learned I had Irlen Syndrome. Wow. And I have to tell you that, my failure in school followed me and gave me a real sense of insecurity and inferiority. It really, even in spite of all of the successes. And I wore these today because I wanted you to see that even though I almost failed high school, I've received 3 honorary doctorates.
Incredible.
So you have to call me doctor.
I will definitely call you doctor.
And but they're honorary PhDs.
Right.
And so I got them by having life experiences. Mm-hmm. I was also given a number of business awards. What was I being recognized for? Innovation.
Wow.
Because I didn't go to a business school. Uh-huh. I just figured things out as I went along. My dad always said he had miners in isolated mining areas that were not accessible by road because oftentimes he would send a crew in to the bush to dig the hole that was the beginning of a mine. Uh-huh. So there was no town or anything around. And my dad's philosophy was, if you feed your men really, really good food, they will work in those isolated conditions and get the job done. Uh-huh. So it was all about working hard, but playing hard and having really, really good food. And that's a kind of a concept about a quality of atmosphere in our company, but a community of people that still worked really, really hard. Mm-hmm. Okay? No chit-chatting around the water cooler. No politics. There were politics, but I tried to prevent. But it was all about getting the work done.
Right.
And so when I was recognized for my abilities with these wonderful honors, I didn't know I had Irlen Syndrome. And I can remember being called up to receive my award and thinking, in the back of my mind thinking, I wonder if they checked my academic record. And would they change their mind if they knew? I kept thinking they were going to take it away between when they announced my name and when I walked up to receive my award. They'd say, oh, whoops, we made a terrible mistake. We see that you almost failed high school. Is that right? And I would go, I would go skulking away shamefully.
Right.
When I found out I had Irlen Syndrome, it was like, oh my gosh, the heavens opened and I just went, oh, now I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Now I understand why in chemistry class, that periodic table, to me, almost made me nauseous.
Wow.
Looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I see when I look at black letters on a white background, I see words and lines that are vibrating.
Right.
So filling out a form for me is
a nightmare.
You have to fill in between the lines because the lines are actually moving.
Uh-huh.
Like almost like a piece of yarn.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that everybody saw that.
Wow.
But other people were just good at handling it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found out that there was a name for it called Irlen Syndrome, I went, oh my gosh. That's why I didn't read books. That's why I don't like to read books. That's why I don't belong to a book club. And all my friends do. And I found it really kind of validating, and that's when I started to feel, at that age, I started to feel better about my accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I wear these very proudly because I realized that it was the education system that failed me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't fail the education system.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, this is something that you mentioned to me actually a few weeks ago on our phone call, which is also one of the reasons why I was increasingly captivated by your story, because that was something that, again, you didn't share at the Top 10 event. So when you mentioned that to me, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, now I understand. This is so interesting. And I've looked into it a little bit. This is something you mentioned to me. I had no idea what it was, to be honest. And I looked into it a little bit deeper, and something popped into my mind as a curious question that I wanted to ask you. Mm-hmm. Because I know that with some of the people that I've been mentored by who have had what some others would call disabilities, those disabilities in their experiences have catapulted them into what it is that they're doing today.